I'm Lisa Geisbon. I'm Executive Director of Citizens for Public Schools, a statewide public education advocacy organization founded in 1982. And we fight for equitable and adequate school funding, for eliminating barriers to educational opportunity and access, and for better ways to assess student learning and school quality. So we are thrilled to have you all here tonight for this workshop with two leaders of the Beyond Test Scores project, Melanie Pavo and Jack Schneider. The response to this event, at least people who registered for it, and hopefully will all show up, indicates a hunger for knowledge about alternatives to our current system, which over the past several decades has proven to be chronically underperforming and in need of intervention. I want to mention some upcoming events that may be of interest. You can mark April 5th at 6:30 p.m. on your calendars for a gubernatorial forum on education, co-sponsored by CPS and Mass Education Justice Alliance, along with a number of other groups. And those of you on our mailing list will be getting reminders and a registration link for that event. If you're not already on our list, you can sign up via our website, citizensforpublicschools.org. And also watch for details about our upcoming series on Latinx education in April and May, part of an ongoing series on public education and race. I want to acknowledge that, I don't know if he's here yet, but if he is, Senator Jason Lewis had registered. He's the co-chair of the legislature's Joint Education Committee, and also Rep. Jim Hawkins joining us tonight. Thank you for being here. Both have sponsored legislation to reform our assessment and accountability system and support alternatives to the MCAS-driven system. I want to thank the Mass Teachers Association for its support of the Beyond Test Scores project and this event. And I want to acknowledge the great team who helped plan and put together this event: Melanie Pavo, Jack Schneider, CPS Board President Dan French, and CPS Board Member Lou Kruger. And without further ado, I want to turn it over to our fearless leader for tonight, Melanie Pavo.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our workshop, Beyond Test Scores, Building a Better Measure of School Quality. We're so excited today to get a chance to share alternative measures of school quality with all of you and talk about how to get this work off the ground in your school and district. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Melanie Pavo. I'm currently pursuing my PhD in Leadership and Education at UMass Lowell. I'm also a former high school English teacher and currently work as a research assistant on the Beyond Test Scores project. The workshop will be generally broken up into 4 parts. We'll start with a brief overview of current school quality measures in Massachusetts. Then we'll move into an activity to give you all a chance to work with a couple of sets of school quality data. And then after that, we'll be talking about building a school quality framework that reflects what communities value in their schools, and wrap up with a panel of folks that are currently engaged with this work in their own schools and districts, and a question and answer session after that. Let me get started here. So let's start with a quick warm-up question that we'd like you all to answer. What are the most important characteristics of a good school? As you think of your answers, please type them in the chat. You can type as many or as little as you see fit. We'll give you a few minutes to come up with some ideas. So we've got a lot of different answers here, but I also see a lot of commonalities. I see a safe space for students quite a few times on here, connections with the community, warm and welcoming environments, critical thinking skills, where students are valued, authentic relationships. There's a lot of mention of relationships here, adequate staffing, fully funded, lots of really, really great answers here. And we'll notice, and I think this will become a refrain for tonight, that standardized test scores haven't appeared here just yet. And so part of what tonight is all about is thinking about what do we really value in schools and how can we then measure these things that show so much more about schools than standardized test scores. But before we turn to that, let's take a second and look at how DESE currently measures school quality here in Massachusetts. So what are the current measures of school quality in Massachusetts by DESE? DESE uses 6 indicators to measure its schools, which are weighted differently based on whether or not the school population has a population of English learners and the grade levels that are served at the school. The first indicator, achievement, is the measure of students who achieve meeting or exceeding expectations on the math, science, and ELA MCAS exams. This is the most heavily weighted indicator at about 1/2 to 2/3 of that accountability or school quality score. The second indicator, student growth, is measured by student growth percentiles or SGP. These show how much a student has grown in MCAS achievement from one year to the next by comparing their growth to that of students with similar historical MCAS results. This indicator accounts for about 1/5 of the school's rating. The next is high school completion, which is only used as an indicator for high schools. This includes the 4-year cohort graduation rate, the extended engagement rate, which is the 5-year cohort graduation rate plus the % of students who are still enrolled, and the annual dropout rate. The fourth indicator is English language proficiency, which is only used for schools with a population of English learners. This indicator measures the % of students meeting annual English language targets. DESE also uses chronic absenteeism as an indicator, which measures the percentage of students missing 10% or more of their days in membership. And finally, the 6th indicator is advanced coursework completion, which is another indicator that's only used for high schools. This is measured by the % of 11th and 12th graders completing advanced coursework. So considering that we have 6 total indicators, 2 of which rely on MCAS scores, exactly how much are MCAS scores weighted in DESE school ratings? Well, MCAS scores, which, as I said before, are used to measure achievement and SGP, account for 80% or more of elementary and middle school ratings, depending on EL population, and 60% or more of high school ratings, again, depending on L population. So in all schools, MCAS scores account for the majority of school accountability ratings. But you might be asking yourself, what's so wrong with using test scores to account for most of a school's quality ratings? Well, we know that test scores have some pretty significant limitations as measures of school quality. First, we know that socioeconomic backgrounds and parents' educational attainment are both strong predictors of test scores. This means that schools with large populations of low income and students of color are more likely to be identified as struggling. Identifying schools in this way steers families towards schools that are branded as being more successful. These purportedly more successful schools tend to be whiter and more affluent, further exacerbating school segregation. We also know that test scores can be easily inflated by gaming the system and even cheating in response to the high stakes associated with test scores. Examples include changing the curriculum to focus exclusively on tested content, reclassifying students and manipulating who takes the test versus who doesn't, systems of alerting students to correct or incorrect answers while testing, and even changing students' answers after they've completed the test. Moreover, we know that the cut scores for many high-stakes tests are set arbitrarily. Different methods by different panels can lead to disparate cut scores on the same exam. And we should also ask ourselves, is there really a difference between the student who meets expectations and the student who is 1 point away from that standard? And then finally, test scores only measure a small fraction of what communities want their schools to be able to do. Which brings us back to that opening question that we asked you. What are the most important characteristics of a good school? And you answered things like relationships, student-teacher relationships, welcoming and safe school climates, critical thinking skills, connection with the community, a collaborative place, holistic learning, everyone is valued, teachers are allowed professional autonomy, authentic relationships. I mean, there are so many great answers here, and very few of those, if any, have to do with standardized test scores. So with that in mind, what kind of information do we get when we research a school in Massachusetts? Let's look at one example, which is Charlestown High School in Boston. So in December 2021, a group of parents submitted a proposal to shut down Charlestown High School and reopen it as Charlestown Innovation and Inclusive High School. The proposal has since failed, but the data on which the proposal relied on was all from DESE. The proposal cited a number of concerns with Charlestown High: dropping enrollment over the last few years, a low graduation rate, low student NCAS performance, and its rank in the bottom 10% of high schools across the state. The question is Charlestown High really failing? We want you to have a chance to look at some of the available data and see what you think. So we're going to transition to an activity to give you a chance to look at data and come to your own conclusions about Charlestown High. And to do that, we're going to put everyone into some smaller groups and breakout rooms to give you a chance to look at that data. So there are two links that you're going to be using. The first is the DESE school report card for Charlestown High School. And then the second, let me put that with a heading so that it's clear. And then the second is MCIE data for Charlestown High School. And MCIEA, or the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovation Education Assessment, uses a system that focuses on a school quality framework that includes multiple measures beyond test scores. And as you look through each set of data, we're going to ask you to make a note of 3 observations that you can share with your small groups. We'll also have a facilitator from our team here in each of those small groups to help people back in here. So I'm going to get moving on the next part here so that we have time for our panel and for questions and all those pieces. So we're on the third part here of the presentation, is all about how to do this kind of work in your own district or your own school. And so we've just created a brief overview of the kind of work that we've been doing in districts and how we've built school quality frameworks that have that are district-based or school-based, so what those communities value. So why should we even engage in this kind of work? What are even the benefits of building a school quality framework from the ground up? Well, first, it gives voice to teachers, students, families, community members. And with this approach, we learn what's most important to the members of our own communities, including the ones that are most engaged with our schools. Second, building a school quality framework validates and valorizes our educational aims beyond test scores. So there's just so much more that our schools can do and do, and this type of framework recognizes that. Doing this work also assists in establishing common language for discussing these aims that go beyond test scores, facilitating conversations about school quality among all members of the school community. And This work makes educational data accessible and digestible. It's not easy, as I think we've just noticed, to find and understand school quality data on the DESE website. This kind of work makes data accessible to all and presents it in a way that makes it easier to understand. So the first step in the process is to give voice to learn what's important to your particular school community, and that is giving voice to stakeholders. So you can do this using focus groups or facilitated discussions that give voice to a diverse group of stakeholders. And this includes focusing on non-dominant populations in your community so that as many voices are heard as possible. These focus groups are usually made up of about 6 to 8 participants, and they last about an hour. And the recommendation is to have 2 one-hour sessions per demographic group to maximize your understanding of what's important when it comes to school quality in your community. In addition, focus groups are semi-structured. So with that format, it allows for facilitated dialogue. And when it's semi-structured, the structure piece comes from an interview guide or an interview protocol that helps to guide the session. So a well-designed interview protocol keeps conversation on track and elicits a wide variety of responses. There are no set questions for this protocol, but we do have an example of something that we've used in previous work with communities. And this particular protocol has 5 questions. So what are the most important characteristics of a good school in this community? What would separate a good school from an adequate school? In choosing a school for your child, what would you look for in a school? What is something important that your current school does really well? And what is something important that your school needs to work on? As you can see from these questions, they all attempt to get at the idea of school quality from a different angle. And this helps to ensure that you get a wide variety of responses from the group. Once you've completed all these focus groups, you should have the data that you need to create the framework. So the first step in this part of the process is to create a master list with all of the unique characteristics that focus group participants came up with. Then you group these characteristics by theme or category. And I'll show you here a sample subsection of a framework that we've created for a school community after focus groups were completed. So you'll see 3 levels of grouping here: major category, subcategory, and indicator. You can create as many levels as you need to organize your framework. This one just happens to have 3. So one major category that we had in this framework was school culture. And underneath that, you see 2 subcategories: school culture and atmosphere. And then underneath that, we have 2 indicators: cultural competency and welcoming school environment. We have a similar grouping process for another subcategory under school culture, which is school leadership. And under there, you'll see effective leadership and shared leadership. So this is just one small subsection. There are a number of other subcategories under that major category. You can see how, using the responses from the community, you can create a framework that's grouped together by commonalities, but also has separate indicators that you can then look to measure. And for each of those indicators, you'll assign a measure to help indicate the quality of the school. So what kind of measures can you use? As you saw from the MCIA data, there are a lot of surveys there. You can also use administrative data, which I'll talk about in a second, and school walkthroughs. So when it comes to surveys, they quantify the perspective of various school stakeholders. And I'm sure you saw in the MCIA data, you had students who are answering questions, you had teachers who are answering questions. There's also community members, so you can survey parents, etc. These are especially convenient because you can find a number of free and open source repositories of surveys online that measure many aspects of school quality. And we've compiled a list of those available open source surveys in our toolkit, which Jack just shared with you in the chat, that's available on the Beyond Test Scores website. So one example of a survey use would be to measure welcoming school environment. And you could do that using a school climate survey measure given to students. can also use administrative data. So there's a lot of administrative data that schools and districts already collect. Think of class size, teacher retention rates, attendance rates. We have a list also in that toolkit of all of the publicly available administrative data from the DESE website. But schools, of course, aren't collecting everything. So you might find that you need to collect another data point in your school or district to get at the indicator that you'd like. Teacher retention is something that is being collected all the time. So teacher retention, the indicator, could be measured using just the teacher retention rate. One thing that may not be being measured is I'm thinking the percent of students taking certain arts courses versus overall arts courses, or the percent of students who are eligible to take advanced courses. So those are indicators that you might be adding in. And then the last type of measure that we have suggested for use is the school walkthrough. So this is when an individual or a group of individuals walk through the school for the purpose of observation. For instance, you could use it to measure an indicator that's visible as you walk through a school, like physical spaces. And it could be a facilities walkthrough. There are some models for walkthroughs that already exist, and we also have those in the toolkit if you're interested in looking at those. So once you have your indicators, which we talked about, your entire framework, your measures, the next step after that is to visualize with a data dashboard. And you saw a glimpse of that with the MCIEA, and to a certain extent with the DESE data. We also have an open source data dashboard that's available. So one of the goals of this project is to make that data accessible. And this dashboard, the code for it, is freely available for any school or school district to use. So you'll see here from the example, you have a rating for each category on a color-coded spectrum. So teachers and leadership, community, etc. And once you browse through that dashboard, you're able to see the ratings for each part of the framework, much like the MCIEA example. And just to show you very briefly what I'm talking about, I have a sample here. So this is a sample dashboard, and this combines survey and administrative data. So if you look at teachers and leadership, for instance, you have an overall score here of 3.7. And so what makes up that score? For instance, under leadership, you have retention of leadership. So that's an administrative data point. So how the rate at which school leaders stay in that position from one year to the next. And then supported and responsive leadership, which is survey questions. So when you click on retention of leadership, you can imagine that this is going to be a really high number because it's 5.0. And when you click through it, you'll see the best possible value is 100% and the school is 100%. So they're really retaining their leaders from one year to the next. And then you can go back and look at the survey questions for supportive and responsive leadership and see what kinds of survey questions went out. And these went out to teachers. And so you have questions like, how clearly do your school leaders identify goals? How knowledgeable are you that your school leaders know what's going on in the classroom? And if you click through those, you'll also get the number of responses, just like MCIA and the average response. So you're able to input all of that into a data dashboard. I know I just went through all that rather quickly. I wanted to make sure that we had time for the panel. So if you have any questions on the data dashboard or anything that I just said in the framework, we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. But I do want to take the time because we have some guest speakers for our panel today that are engaged in this type of work already in their own districts. Kenya, do you mind if we start with you?
No, not at all. So as I mentioned to my smaller group, my name is Kenya Avant. I work for Somerville Public Schools as the data coordinator there. Our district, forgive me everyone, has been, if I get this wrong, but has been participating in the MCIA work now for about 6 years, I want to say. possibly 7. We were one of the first districts that Jack Schneider reached out to start the process. I remember the first survey went out to students on cell phones. And so as sort of as a pilot in the district. So we've been with the MCIA for a while. In my role specifically, I, as the data coordinator, I work with data sets throughout the district, spanning the academic data sets. We talked a bit about MCAS here today, but MCAS and inclusive of formative assessments and other types of assessments in the district. And I also work with survey data. And so one of the, I'll start, I guess, with the steps of how we have used the dashboard in our district, and how we sort of got it out to folks so they could then use it. So when the framework was very different, I think I would say, than any other way we looked at survey data. It was really useful to have a dashboard, but it also meant that we had to do some sort of going out, sort of a roadshow with principals, sitting down with each of them and sharing the dashboard with them, talking about what it was for and what the data meant, similar to what we all did in our small groups just a little while ago, right? One major step that we took was building the MCIA data into our school improvement process so that it wasn't an extra thing. So that when I met with principals, I would say, and as part of our school improvement process, when we normally look at data, right? Like we normally look at the MCAS, we look at our STAR Enterprise, we look at our DIBLES, right? Like as we're looking at some of these data, here's another set of data that we also will look at. And so then it wasn't an extra, it wasn't an add-on, it was just the way we do business. So that was one way that we sort of built in the MCIA dashboard so that we could be aware of what's happening within schools. The other part, obviously, if we want to have a dashboard that has data to share with principals, we actually need to collect that data. So there was the survey, administering the surveys. And I will say it became a bit difficult to get the survey out because in our district, we have another survey that goes out. It's a similar tool, but it's not the same. And so what we had to sort of juggle those two competing things. We had two surveys that were quite different, but it was a matter of finding time to get the MCIA survey out to which I should say goes out to students and then staff. And one thing that I've implemented recently is as new staff come on board, I make sure to meet with them one-on-one to share the dashboard so we can walk through it and talk about any concerns or questions they might have around how to use it and how to make sense of the data. I think that the dashboard has been useful because it really has allowed us to shift the conversation from what are the problems that the school is facing, right? So if you look at some of our data, the typical thing is like, well, who's up here? Third grade's up here, and then second grade's down here. Second grade's a problem, right? That's sort of where our mind goes. The good thing about the dashboard is it allows you to not just start with the problem, but to be able to dig a bit deeper into what are some of the root causes. So when we start talking about absenteeism, or we start talking about low scores, low test scores, we can say, well, are students feeling supported? Do they feel like they belong in the classroom, right? So you can get down to the actionable items, and then we can take action with those. So I think the most valuable part was it allows us to step back and say, what are the root causes, not just throwing a lot of problems at principals, at staff, at teachers, because that is like recipe for burnout and for disaster if we're running around putting out fires and we don't know what is actually causing them. So I think I'm excited about future iterations for the dashboard that will be released in Somerville soon, where we're linking demographic data for students to the dashboard results. So now we can even do more drilling down. So if we say, students are feeling like the work isn't as challenging as it could be, well, for which students, right? Are those our students who are learning English? Are those our students who have an IEP, or are those our gen ed students? Like what is really going on? And that allows a more targeted approach. I was excited, actually, I'm sorry, one more thing. As Melanie, you were speaking, I was excited to hear, to be reminded of the creating the framework process, because I would share with all of you that I see that as one of the most powerful parts, one of the most powerful steps in having a dashboard like this one, is the opportunity to hear from community members that are representative of the students and the students as well, and the staff in your school community to sort of say, where should we, or where do we want to be? And then you continue the rest of the year, the rest of the 3 to 5 years, trying to figure out, now, how do we get there? So I think that's a really important opportunity. And I just wanted to uplift that, because I think that building that framework is, the business that we're in as educators. Why are we doing what we're doing? What are we trying to measure? And what does getting there look like? So.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Kenya. All right, let me turn it over to Eric Fearing, who is coming to us from Revere.
Thank you. My name is Eric. I am a mathematics teacher at Seacoast Alternative High School in Revere, and I've been a union officer there for 8 years, including being a member of the governing board of the Mass Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment since that first year in the 2015-16 school year. So having been around this work for a while, I've seen Revere as a district and Seacoast as my school go through a lot of different phases of working with these surveys and this survey data. There's some disbelief and anxiety at the beginning, like, are we really going to do this every year? Are we going to be able to come back at it? Do any of the powers that be really think that this stuff matters as much or more than MCAS data? And after that bears out to be true, a period of appreciation and sort of acclimation to how it is we're going to use this in schools. So we've had a chance to become comfortable with the surveys. I think it's worth noting that at first, people are very anxious about having students asked what their math teacher is like or what their history teacher is like. And to do something like this well, you need everybody to be on board and comfortable enough. So taking some time to have teacher leaders involved who are supportive of the project and know how this is going to turn out, that it's not here to embarrass anybody in particular. And same for principals, who are also sort of called out in staff surveys in some ways. It's not about a gotcha, it's about finding ways that we can build schools and improve schools based on what everybody here was talking about at the very beginning of this call, right? It's not just the test data. So as of spring 2019, we were really starting to create school improvement plans that focused on things beyond academic learning and test scores. Things like student sense of belonging, academic challenge rather than outcome have always been more important to us than test scores, but we began writing goals around these things because we had the opportunities to measure them year to year. After that, we got sort of interrupted. There's been this whole pandemic, and now we didn't exactly get the information we would have liked as far as validity to look at it year to year. But even in the very first years before we were doing that, we got useful information like what you saw on that Charlestown site. Because Seacoast is an alternative school, we're very small. We don't necessarily have a state dashboard accountability level every year because our sophomore class might be smaller than the subgroup minimum for confidentiality. So this was really the only thing we built some of our goals around, because it was something we believed in and that was there for us. That meant we did some activities that I think are pretty unique to the school, where we had our entire staff looking at the dashboard, similar to what you did today, but rather than comparing to the Department of Ed, we were doing more of a 3 levels of the data analysis, asking every teacher, every staff member in the school what they saw factually, what they thought that implied about the school, knowing what was going on in the building, and then what the implications would be for their work. So if the teachers think that the academic challenge isn't where it should be for the grade level, but the students feel very heavily pressed, we need to find a way to get more supports in there. We need to make sure that we're teaching what we need to in a way that the students have entry into, so that it's not a slog, so that they report that they're supported. The big outcomes overall across all of the schools in the city is that the obsession with state accountability levels is in fact starting to fade. With the trends we've seen, it's hard to reach a big conclusion because of COVID, but the framework we have is really useful for improvement efforts, to be sure. Some of the other implementation points, the focus groups to create the framework were very important. And in the consortium, we did that across all of the districts involved. So it wasn't city specific. You could do that either way. One thing worth mentioning is that not only are those set up at the beginning with what your framework's going to be, but you have the chance to revisit that with all different stakeholder groups and say, what would be a good score on this 2 years, 3 years, 5 years later, right? The dark green bar, the light green bar, where do those belong is really a very important question about what you think your school district should be like. And that's something that you can do even when you are happy with a framework that's broad enough to capture what you want your schools to do.
Great, thank you so much, Eric. And then our last panelist here is John Ports, who's coming to us from Watertown.
Okay, I think I'm the newbie representative here of the district that's just getting started. So as Melanie said, I'm from Watertown, so a much smaller district too than certainly Somerville and Everett. 2,600 students or thereabouts, 5 schools. So and we definitely at an early stage here. Last fall Melanie did the focus groups. We started a little bit before that, but the pandemic, like everything else, kind of slowed this process down as well. But she did the focus groups and then put together kind of the initial framework of what that might look like and the different categories, those main categories. And then in the fall, we had, that was presented to the school committee. When I was on the school committee, I actually did not run last fall, so I'm no longer on the committee, but I was chair of the committee last December when we had this discussion. And so it is a kind of initial discussion before the school committee and some kind of initial reactions. And right now I would say we're in a bit of a pause because of other things that are happening in the district, collective bargaining, negotiations, and all kinds of other things that happen in school districts. And, as a smaller district, we don't have as many staff that, the superintendent plays a key role in this process, and she gets split a lot of different ways. So it's hard to keep attention to this. But one of the very important things that I would say that to kind of get started in this program is to have that the kind of support from the administration, in particular the superintendent, and from the school committee. And I was on the school committee. The superintendent we've had for a couple of years, and she's very supportive of this. So those are really kind of critical ingredients, if you will. I would say in Watertown, if I think back, I was on the committee for 16 years, and I go back before that. And I think twice before we've tried to do something kind of like this. And I actually tried to do something about 5 or 6 years ago, and it ultimately didn't have the support of the superintendent. And if it doesn't, you don't have that kind of administrative support, it kind of fades away. So it's really important to try to develop that. But again, it's trying to get a focus of attention on it. And I will make the one comment in my subgroup that we were in. One person made the comment that when they looked at the Charlestown MCIEA data, it's a lot of data. And that's something you have to really navigate when you put it out in a public session. Because if Melanie remembers, when we did that at the school committee, it was a little bit overwhelming for the school committee. And, in retrospect, I can think we should have probably tried to parcel that out in a little different way. But we'll come back to it.
Thanks, John. I think it's just as important that, Watertown's in the beginning stages of this. So it's a great point of view to get as well. So I'm so thankful for you coming and joining us here today. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left here, and we've reserved this time for questions and answers to ask of the panelists or any of the Beyond Test Scores or CPS team, anybody that's here. So feel free to put them in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask, or to raise your virtual hands. Any or all of the above are welcome.
I'll go. I'm helping Max Page and Deb McCarthy, their campaign for MTA president and vice president. I'm confident they're going to win, and I'm looking to see what the MTA can further do to advocate and advance this. I know as a classroom teacher, an 8th grade science teacher who has MCAS in a district that is now shifting more towards the MCAS than they were in the past. In the past, we had a gentleman's agreement that, our students did okay, and at least we weren't one of those gateway schools that had to worry about this. And now they're making major changes to our curriculum to align with the MCAS more fully, so they can have that blue ribbon school that they always wanted. So I'm ready to take part in more advocacy in my district and also statewide.
I can respond to that a little
Thanks,
bit.
Jim.
I filed a bill with MTA this year to actually start to use MCIA type work, and it was written by MTA. And contact me offline. I can tell you how you can help us with that. The biggest problem we have is most people don't know about it. They don't realize how good this program is and what a change you can make for our schools.
So jump in here. Thanks, Rep. Hawkins. So one of the things that we're trying to do through the Beyond Test Scores project is grow this movement beyond just our consortium. So, there is MCIEA, and we've got 2 co-founders of the consortium here because Dan French was instrumental there in that. And we're very proud of that work. At the same time, we want to make it possible for districts to do this kind of work on their own and at their own pace, and to push out free tools to use. So I've been putting things in the chat like our toolkit, or Melanie referenced this sort of basic kind of data dashboard that we can give you for free tomorrow. So if you're interested in that kind of advocacy, we're also working with the MTA because we're interested in working directly with educators. We're of course partnering with Citizens for Public Schools because we're interested in working with citizens. We're interested in working with everybody who wants to be a part of this movement to think more broadly about what public schools do, why public schools matter, and how we can return the conversation to one that really captures the things that community members and, one group that often doesn't get talked about, the kids themselves, right, value in school, and that makes learning feel valuable and relevant in their lives. So I've also put my email there, and Melanie is our project lead for this project. She's the greatest graduate student in the world, so start with her, but also feel free to email me. I see there are a bunch of other questions, so I'm going to shut up here and let Melanie take care of that.
So Melanie, there's one question in the chat from Elizabeth. Can those who are using the MCIA approach, so really Eric and Kenya, to approach the data, talk more about uses of the data and any guardrails for data use? Sometimes the issue is less with what kind of data is collected and shared, and more with how it is used.
Yes, one of the founding principles behind this is to make sure that we're not churning out a 1-number summary that leads somebody to just rank schools and close their bottom 10% or anything like that. Yeah, there's a lot of data on that dashboard, as has been noted, and that can make it tough to get through, but it also keeps you from pretending that it's easy to summarize what a school really is and does. We're going through another iteration of what the dashboard will look like for the consortium that does less breaking out to individual questions, because when you see that exact thing, it's less scientifically backed, and it's also a little sharper, a criticism of perhaps one program, one leader, one department. So some of it is in what data you collect, and a lot of it is in how you use it and how you present it, and being sure to always give a full picture and not shrink it down to percentalizing, as the department calls it, is just really important.
And Eric, can you follow that up by talking about, can you think of one concrete example of a data point you found that resulted in change in practice in the school?
That might take me a moment.
Okay, we can come back to Kenya. Did you?
Yeah, I was just gonna comment. I think Eric's right in that it's and Elizabeth, I think this was also in your question. It's about how you use the data. So we in Somerville, I try, of course, there are lots of people there, but we try to always use data as part of a data inquiry process, right? So we look at the data, we see what stands out, where we might want to make improvement, and then going through those data and saying, well, what might be causing these data to be the way they are, or what conditions are holding these problems in place, is another way to sort of, that I've heard it framed. And then testing out some theories, right, by circling back to the very people who gave us those responses, right, to the survey. So reaching out to students and having conversations around what do you think is happening around this issue? What might be driving the problem? Conversations with teachers and other staff, and then figuring out what the plan will be to address it. So the data are not, I mean, I think you're right, like the data aren't useful as just data. The important part is how we're using those data to make sure that we're getting to where we need to be, if that makes sense. As an example, I think there was a question I saw around like correlating the dashboard data to other types of data. I can say at one point in our dashboard data, there was an area around student well-being, I believe, but essentially the questions were around how stressful is schoolwork for you? Like, questions around like, are you stressed out as a result of doing schoolwork? When we looked at those data and then looked at the school that they were attached to, this was a very high performing school. And so what it seemed to be was that students were putting in, 115%, but at the same time, it was wearing them down. And so then that led to conversations around how do we still maintain rigor and have students be successful without putting them in a space where it's no longer, healthy for their mental states. So, it's just a way, when you look at those data, you can sort of put them side by side. And so, there's benefit to having both a way to look at student data and those perception data, and being able to tie it to other types of data that you have already at your fingertips to make sense of the environment and to think about how you make improvements.
Okay, let me turn it over to Jeremy, who's been patiently waiting with a raised hand.
Thank you. It always takes me a second to find the raised hand button. Okay. Regarding Kenya's most recent comment about the how and the why and the root causes of survey responses, I'm wondering about open-ended and qualitative data and whether there's room for that kind of data in measurements of school quality outside of the framework building stage and outside of this follow-up stage, but as a sort of core part of how we're thinking about schools, because I'm a writing teacher, and so there's a lot of numbers, and I wonder if there's a way around that.
I'll jump in here, Jeremy. So I think it's a fabulous idea, and it's one that we've discussed in this project to sort of push out tools to folks. There are things we haven't done. So there's our MCIEA work, there's this work. They're all part of this broader project, right? And we haven't gone down that road with our MCIEA work for a variety of reasons I won't get into. But in this project, we are trying to think about what are some of the things that we could capture that aren't typically part of alternative measurement efforts. And one of them is, the sort of open-ended stuff that you can get when you allow people to simply say what's on their mind rather than giving them a Likert-style question, right? A closed-ended question. And that's where our walkthrough suggestion comes from as well, right? There's a lot that we can learn by drawing on our human abilities to understand what's going on inside a school. And one of the things I've always said about MCIEA work is that people know a hell of a lot about their schools if you take the time to actually talk to them. And of course, when I say talk, I'm using that as a metaphor because the way we talk to them through MCIEA is through those surveys. But actually talking to people can also be a part of this. So happy to continue that conversation in some way later.
Okay, Doug.
Hi, thanks for the evening. I'm wondering if you all have approached the Massachusetts Association of School Committees with this work. They, as a group, wrote a letter to DESE expressing their opposition to MCAS. And one of the challenges is spreading the word and letting people know this exists and there are alternatives. They would be a group that, if you haven't reached out to them, perhaps would be receptive to hearing about it. I think the superintendent's also sent a letter opposing MCAS. So thinking about the sort of larger scale of how to reach out to a lot of folks quickly might be another thing to add to your spinning plates, Jack.
Yeah.
We have presented several years in a row at the Massachusetts Association of School Committee and Superintendents Joint Annual Conference, and we've gotten we always get very good response, and the question is how do we leverage the support for this work to change the state system. And part of that is also working with the legislature and Jim Hawkins and other legislators around putting some press on.
So for all my briefings, I bring the superintendent from Attleboro and somebody from the school committee from Attleboro. They're very proud of this work and very proud supporters of it.
Yeah. So, but Doug, yes, we should keep up the pressure on those state associations to back up their words with action.
I want to take a quick second to Shelley's question. I hope I'm saying that name right. I apologize if I mispronounced it, about convincing parents that student progress is affected by this data. And I'm happy to let anyone else jump in, but I did want to say parents are one of the stakeholder groups that we reach out to when we start building the framework, right? So one of those are actually, I've had lots and lots of parents start with that framework. And so they're already a part of the process from the beginning, and getting that buy-in starts there. And a lot of open communication and a lot of just being very clear about what we're measuring and why we're measuring it has been helpful. But I want to definitely point out that parents are part of the process when you're building the framework, just like teachers, just like students, just like administrators, all of those pieces there. I'm happy to let anyone else add to that.
Well, I'd like to respond back to Kenya's comments and talk a little bit about the qualitative data. And I agree with Kenya that students oftentimes feel burnt out and overworked. But the work of Bill Damon points to the idea that it actually, a key element anyway, and I think we could see it in the data you guys collected, is that the work has no meaning to them. It does, they don't care about it. It doesn't change their lives. It doesn't integrate with their lives. And that's part of that whole of that whole reaction of people feeling somewhat burnt out. They're burnt out because they don't care about what they're doing. And it's an idea that you can get at with qualitative data. And I'm a qualitative researcher, so I'm a bit biased in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I just, in the interest of time, we're a couple of minutes over time, so I just want to throw a few quick things out there. And the first is, Jack has put in my email a number of times, I know, but my email address is in the chat. If you are interested in any and all parts of this work, please do not hesitate to reach out. And then the other thing I want to put in there as I wrap up and give some closing comments is a form. If you could take a second to fill that out, just to get some information and to let us know that you're interested in maybe continuing with this work and how we can support you in doing that. We really hope to spread this movement across the state and beyond test scores, the MTA, Citizens for Public Schools. We're all committed to helping build a movement that includes teachers, administrators, students, parents, community members, all of you. And we're ready to support you in doing that. So with the support of the MTA, we can help you launch this work in your district. And that's including all the steps. So that's recruiting the focus groups, running the focus groups, developing the framework, getting started with the data dashboard. We're here to support you in all of that. And we're also willing to present or run a workshop locally for your school committee, your superintendent, your teachers union, school staff, communities, all of those stakeholder groups to help you build, engage, support for the project. One more quick plug for that exit ticket is just a quick form in the chat to get a sense of where you're at and what kind of support that you might need. And I think that's it. Is there anything that I missed?
That's just one more note,
Yeah,
Melanie.
absolutely.
This is a conversation for another day, but a key component of the school quality measures data dashboard is the academic learning section. And so what MCIA is doing is we've been building the capacity of teachers in schools and districts to be able to make decisions about student learning progress and proficiency through actual real world performance assessments rather than test scores. So that's the other piece of the equation that is key to this whole school quality measures movement. Back to you, Melanie.
I'm gonna seize the final word so that I can praise Melanie. And I said
Yes.
she's the world's greatest graduate student, but she's tied because a second of my PhD students has been with us this evening, and she led one of the groups. So Kara McGovern also shares that title. So thank you, Melanie. Thanks, Kara, for assisting Melanie on this. The two of you are fabulous. And thanks to Citizens for Public Schools for co-organizing and for doing so much of the legwork to get the word out about this event. And thanks for all the work that you all do all the time. And then finally, thank you to everybody who took time out on St. Patrick's Day. We got a couple grumpy emails from people. I can't believe you're doing this on St. Patrick's Day. So thanks for, I guess, giving up, one Guinness in your evening to spend some time with us. And hopefully you've got the rest of the night to enjoy yourself.
Make
as you
those
see fit.
corned beef and cabbage Hamantaschen.
Okay.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
everyone.
everybody.